Well, I want to welcome everyone to the RCR Wireless News Connected Cities Public Safety LTE Trends webinar. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm Editor-in-Chief of RCR Wireless News. And today I will be joined by Industry Analyst Gerry Purdy from MobileTrax, Douglas Louie with Smith Micro, and James Silk with Rohde and Schwarz to take a look at LTE and mobile broadband trends in the public safety arena. The plan for today's one-hour webinar is to cover a handful of topics concerning LTE and mobile broadband trends in the public safety space and provide an overview of the ecosystem, some context as to how the space is evolving, challenges impacting the space, and what the future could bring for mobile broadband in the public safety market. For additional follow-up, we'll be releasing a report on this subject this week that will be available on the rcrwireless.com website, so take a look for that. For those of you who may have stumbled upon RCR Wireless News looking to get more information on the LTE public safety space, here's a quick slide giving some background on RCR Wireless News. We've been covering the mobile space for more than 30 years and have a pretty lengthy history in covering the wireless ecosystem. As I mentioned earlier, joining me on today's call is Gerry Purdy from MobileTrax. Gerry, thanks for joining us today. Would you please maybe give a quick background on yourself and some information on MobileTrax for our listeners?
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate to be here on the webinar. Very interesting subject of public safety. I've been working with mobile enterprise for over 15 years. I started analyst career with the DataQuest division of Gartner, had my own firm for a number of years, and did a 4-year stint as chief analyst for mobile and wireless at Frost & Sullivan. I do an industry newsletter called Inside Mobile. It's free if anybody would like to go sign up for it. And do market research consulting and an annual awards program called the Mobility Awards. So have fun in this industry and enjoy this particular public safety sector, and I think we'll have some interesting things to share. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Gerry. Appreciate that. Thanks so much. As I mentioned also, joining us today is Douglas Louie from Smith Micro. Douglas, thanks for taking the time today, and would you please also give maybe a quick background on yourself and some info on Smith Micro?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. This is Doug Louie. I'm Senior Director of Product Marketing at Smith Micro. Smith Micro's heritage, actually, we've been around for about 30 years, and we're one of the, really the leading manufacturer of connection management software, providing that software out to the major carriers such as AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, and many other global carriers, resulting in over about 100 million copies of that software out in the marketplace. Stemming off of that, we've taken that expertise in providing carrier management and connectivity software now to the public safety industry, and we've most recently announced the signing of Washington, D.C.'s Metro Police Department utilizing the connection management for their police cars to keep their officers connected at all times. So we're excited to be here. We think as the transition goes from 3G to LTE, that the advent of video and other capabilities, are going to press the network needs even greater, and we're happy to help in that space. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate that, Douglas. Thanks so much for the information there. And then also joining us is James Silk from Rohde and Schwarz. James, thanks for joining us today, and would you please also give us a quick background on yourself and some information on Rohde and Schwarz?
Well, thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending. My name is James Silk. I'm the Product Marketing Manager of handheld devices for Rohde and Schwarz, supporting public safety and secure communications. Rohde and Schwarz as a company has been around for over 77 years, supporting electronic test and measurement equipment for the wireless community, 2G, 3G, and now moving into 4G, and supplying equipment for LTE compliance, conformance testing, and just a number of different areas in the LTE arena. I've spent my time working at General Dynamics, been contracting for a government agency for a number of years, moving on to Hitachi, and then joining a little company called Qualcomm, and then from there to Spire Communications, and now with Rohde going on 6 years. Thanks, Dan.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, James. Appreciate it, and good to hear about that small little company out of San Diego, too. Very good. So anyway, well, again, thanks everyone for joining us today. Definitely appreciate it. As I mentioned, we plan on covering a handful of topics today, including an overview on the current market, maybe take a deeper dive into some various segments of the ecosystem, and finally take a look at the future of the space as well. Plan on leaving about 15 minutes or so at the end of the presentation for questions from those of you listening in. Please feel free to use the question function box on the GoToWebinar tab that should be on your screen to send those questions in, and we'll try to get to as many questions at the end as possible. If you have a question for a specific member of the panel, please put their name at the beginning of the question. And like I said, too, we'll try to get to as many as we can. Those that we can't get to, we will be sharing the questions with our panel members offline as well, and so they'll be able to, if they have time, follow up afterwards with some of those questions. Also, for those that might be having audio difficulties, we will try to speak as loudly as possible on this. Please make sure to also check your audio settings. Sometimes, listening to it on speakers, if you don't have the right buttons pushed, you won't get the right sound. So, but we will try to speak as clearly and loudly as possible for everyone. All right, so we're jumping on in here with a basic overview of the market here. Obviously, it's gotten a lot of press over the past couple of years with the move to LTE. The public safety community has for years been looking at providing more advanced services to their constituents, to their members. A recent report from Mind Commerce shows on the screen here that the market is expected to grow to over $6 billion in revenues by 2016, up from just $240 million last year. So obviously for the industry, there's a lot of potential here. And unlike a lot of services that perhaps are being provided by the market, this is one of those types of services that does some good for just about everybody, as opposed to being perhaps just a game or something like that. So definitely a lot of incentive there. Obviously, also earlier this year, Congress signed off on public safety deep block frequency allocations and plans to support it with up to $7 billion. That was a big push, I think, for the space, and hopefully shows some signs that the spectrum issues that have been plaguing this market for some time might be getting squared away, and some financial support to get these networks up and running. So obviously those are some big moves for the industry at this time. Before we get too much farther, what I wanted to do, oops, wrong way there, was do a quick survey of our listeners to kind of get an idea of who's dialing in, and maybe we can tailor what we're talking about to different aspects of the listening audience. I do have a quick poll here that I will try to launch without destroying the internet. Hopefully this goes well. Obviously, so the question is, I guess, what is your position in the public safety ecosystem? And so if you guys can go ahead and vote there, we'll leave this up for about 45 seconds to get kind of a general view of where the people are from here during for the webinar, and that'll kind of help us a little bit as we go forward. So we'll leave this up for about another 30 seconds, and I'll kind of share the results with everyone at the end of it here. So we'll let this go for a bit longer. Let's see what we get. About 10 seconds more. Looks like the always popular other category is doing well, so that's always good to see. All right, let's see. All right, we'll close the poll now and share the results. Appreciate everyone for voting in on that. So looks like so far for this we've got about 37% from the vendor community, 34% from other, 20% from the carriers, 4% from the public safety community, and 3% from the device chipset space. So again, thanks everyone for voting on that. That definitely helps us get a better idea of who's kind of dialing in for this. So we appreciate that. All right, so moving on to the survey at hand here. What I want to do was kind of kick off the webinar and spend some time talking with Gerry to get an overview of the public safety market and how that market is handling the move to LTE and mobile broadband services. So maybe Gerry, bring you on now. Maybe get, I guess, your general overview of the market right now. Kind of, I know you've been covering this space for quite some time from the analyst side. So if we get some insight from you on how you see this market evolving.
Thanks, Dan. We'll cover a few things in this overview for taking just a couple of minutes. First, on the mobile device side, it's just been amazing to see the transition from feature phones a few years ago were dominant in the market to smartphones today. 70% of the mobile phones sold today are, in fact, smartphones coming from iOS, Android, some from Microsoft and Research in Motion. Of course, Microsoft just made a big announcement with Nokia today on Windows Phone 8, and Research in Motion has an entirely new operating system coming to market in first quarter 2013. iOS and Android dominate the market share today. But another area, these tablets have really taken off, particularly the iPad, expected to sell over 100 million units this year, and a forecast I constructed about 4 or 5 months ago demonstrated or showed that tablets are going to exceed PCs within sales within 5 years. And what all of this device trends means is that it sets up tremendous bandwidth utilization at the seam, both for upload and download. There's been a lot of restrictions because of the inability of bandwidth to be able to provide rich media applications to be run by public safety, and we'll get into some of those when we talk a little bit more about some of the ways in which LTE is being used out in the field in these public safety market segments. But AT&T Mobility and Verizon are the largest current deployers of LTE, with Sprint coming on stream. They just announced in the last few weeks the first 10 markets. And T-Mobile has stated they intend to, they still market under 4G, but with their HSDPA plus technology, but all will have LTE, which is actually great because that means all 4 major carriers will have a common coding mechanism for utilization of wireless data modems and devices, and it'll make it easy for companies that are both hardware and software suppliers in the vendor space, as well as service providers, as well as the actual field public safety utilization agents, to have a broader access and utilization of mobile broadband out in the field. And I think all the public safety sectors, including medical, police, fire, etc., are going to be benefiting from this. We'll go into some examples of it here in a little bit. But I think this is not something that's limited to a subsector. And as I think you'll find out, there's many new kinds of things being enabled through this richer mobile broadband initiative in LTE than we've had before. And so new ways of thinking of things are actually now coming to market. Back to you.
Great, thanks, Gerry. Appreciate that. Now I know, I guess specifically, dialing down a little bit into the public safety space. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of concern with getting, I guess, richer multimedia, greater capabilities into the hands of first responders and the public safety community. Various, initiatives to do that. Always lots of talks of the benefits of that. But maybe I guess if you can touch on some of those points and the abilities that LTE can bring to this space. I mean, most people think, all you need is a walkie-talkie and do everything you want to do, but obviously there are some benefits of LTE when it comes to the public safety community.
Yeah, particularly in public safety, I think they've wanted for many years to have the ability to deal with rich media to enhance the service offerings. And if you look at the ability of LTE to support both uplink, uplink, the creation of rich media in the field, as well as distribution and downloading of rich media, it's a it's very interesting how you can support both with LTE. And so you think in terms of any kind of medical or police or fire situation where video becomes a real-time, not a recorded for some kind of later review, but actually can be used in real time to help with decision making. Example would be a patient needing medical help and a doctor being able to see a video of the patient as if the person was right next to them, as well as the medical data, the EKG and other information, so that they could make a good and better medical decision. Or being able to send down a link of, here's how you need to do a treatment. In the police, I think, and that part of public safety, live interaction between an officer and the surrounding areas give much more ability for uploading the information, doing analysis, and giving information to the officer and help. It may be for an emergency. It may be due to someone needing to be detained, etc. And in fire, we have a very interesting ability of being able to have more command and control among the resources, giving rich media. You could, for example, see a video camera on someone's helmet, being able to determine better how to give recommendations as to what they need to do to best treat the situation. So we also, with the wireless operators implementing LTE, have multiple channels available so that multiple resources that are at a site, in fact, can give adequate information. I point out that there, software-wise, it's still a challenge to transfer between 3G and LTE while you're moving. So if you think in most of these cases, the vehicles go to a scene of a problem, and they have to deal with that scene, and the vehicle isn't moving, but an ambulance could be moving, and there could be a change in a situation. And so it takes some clever software, and if you're in a public safety space, and make sure that you ask about the ability of how well will it perform while moving in addition to being fixed. Also, we have so much going on with LTE, sometimes Wi-Fi gets pushed aside and say, oh, we don't need Wi-Fi anymore. Well, there's one really big role of Wi-Fi, and that's operating as an access point around a backhaul that's running LTE. So sort of an industrial strength version of the MiFi popular device that users have in the consumer enterprise space. You could see a mechanism where a car will have a scene where they have Wi-Fi to have multiple access points of devices, a tablet, a smartphone, a vertical market collection system, and then backhaul that with LTE. And then I think finally it's important to know the Hotspot 2.0 initiative is coming. It's not there yet today, but you're going to see, because of the offloading requirements, a lot of wireless operators are pushing offloading onto Wi-Fi out of their LTE networks because they don't want to have saturation. So let's say you had a public safety event in downtown Manhattan, and all of a sudden you would like to grab hold of as much bandwidth as you can. There may be a higher demand than even what LTE can provide. And so this Hotspot 2.0 initiative allows for the operator to manage the allocation of spectrum and utilization of bandwidth, providing auto-authentication so that they can make sure that this is an appropriate device, and roaming between these different points of access. And really what you're trying to do is provide a single session ID so that you can migrate between Wi-Fi and LTE. So public safety stands to gain a lot from not only LTE and all the bandwidth and benefits that accrue to that, as well as interacting as complementary through Wi-Fi, which extends that capability. So I think we're in a situation where we're going to see better service given to people, better protection, and a lot of it's happening because LTE is now coming to market, and it allows the public service sector to be more responsive and provide better service. And if you're a victim or someone who's got a medical emergency, you're going to benefit from that, and I think it'll save lives in many different ways, and I think that's makes it very pleasing. So back to you.
That makes sense. Yeah, definitely. Well, I know some of those topics that you brought up, I think we'll be touched on a little bit too later with our other panel members. But before we kind of, I guess, move on to those, I guess I have one maybe little follow-up question on that too, Gerry, for you is, I mean, obviously when it comes to, the networks being deployed, with the big carriers rolling out LTE, can you talk a little bit, I guess, about the importance of, I guess, the commercial carriers when it comes to public safety and LTE deployments? Because obviously, they do have the infrastructure in place now. I know there's always been talk about, kind of having some of that roaming, capabilities onto a commercial network too. How important are those carriers going to be, the commercial carriers, when it comes to this kind of nationwide plan for a public safety LTE network, do you think?
Yeah, I think you hit on something that's very important, because if you're particularly if you're in a public safety environment, the local geography plays most important from the fact that you're delivering at typically a service point, which is somewhere in a community. But in fact, when you think in terms of a market dynamic such as police or fire or medical, those capabilities, those applications need to run as well in Denver as they do in Atlanta or Des Moines, Iowa, or South Florida, or wherever it might be. And so you have to have consistency, and that means particularly this interoperability, where you can buy one modem and be able to potentially get it to operate. There's a number of suppliers that now can operate across network, and that should be looked into if you're in the public safety sector, so that if you have vehicles that are deployed out of local area but still within your geographic coverage area, you can gain still the LTE access as you roam between the different network providers. So that's going to be very important, and you'll see a lot of conferences among the public safety sector talking about, finally we have a standard by which deployment can be done by multiple carriers, and all of the public safety sectors are going to benefit from that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, great. Thanks, Gerry. Appreciate that. Now, before we move on to bringing in some of our other panel members, I wanted to also remind those listening in that if you do have any questions for our panel members, please feel free to use the question tab there in the GoToWebinar control panel. Type those in, and we'll try to get to those towards the end of our session here. Well, again, thanks, Gerry, for the insight there. Let's bring Douglas in. Douglas, obviously with Smith Micro, you kind of mentioned earlier a little bit about some of the work you guys are doing when it comes to supporting public safety, when it comes to handing off between a 3G network and an LTE network, and some of the software involved there. That was obviously one of the topics that Gerry brought up as well. Maybe I guess can you touch on a little bit of kind of what Smith Micro brings to the table when it comes to dealing with that tricky network handoff.
Sure, Dan. That's actually quite convenient. I mean, much to what Gerry was mentioning around the Hotspot 2.0 initiative, we actually already provide a lot of that automatic connectivity today in our solution. So, for instance, police officers, as they're roaming around, our solution actually will sniff out all the available approved network connections out there, whether they be 3G or Wi-Fi, and actually look for connections behind the scenes, and based on quality of the signal and security issues, et cetera, we'll actually make those connections before losing the current connection. And in essence, what actually also is provided is session persistence, so that if a connection were broken, as soon as they connect it back up, the need to re-authenticate is no longer there. And that actually, from a police officer or first responder standpoint, makes it much easier for them to stay connected without wasting seconds trying to find that reconnection or having to deal with IT to help find those connections. And that's the last thing we want, is police officers being frustrated that they can't get those connections. In essence, that connection management software then provides, one, that session persistence and security back to the available networks automatically as they roam and actually as they're moving throughout the city. And I think what's interesting is we moved, 3G is already allowing the transmission of video, but LTE will obviously allow greater utilization of that, and we're going to see a much greater uptake. As they mentioned before, for instance, in the fire department, as they want to be able to get eyes on the scene and assess the situation, we've actually, with our video solution, seen some folks take a look at possibly putting in cameras in that first fire truck that arrives on scene. The dispatcher can then know immediately if they need to send additional units out to that scene without even having to interact with anybody. They can actually get those eyes on right away. Another interesting scenario on the video side is taking the available closed-circuit security cameras that are prevalent within different jurisdictions, and first off, being able to provide those in a mobile stream to any mobile device, allowing first responders immediate eyes-on in a situation. The difference that we're providing is we're able to stream that to hundreds or even thousands of viewers, where the previous limitations were just a few viewers at a time, generally limited to the command center. We can actually send those out to any mobile device and auto-adapt to that device. The other interesting point is these jurisdictions of security cameras typically were separate islands of security cameras out there. For instance, the Department of Parks may have a set of cameras. Your Department of Transportation may have their own set of cameras. Now first responders can actually integrate and find and access all those cameras. If they're all shared in a centrally located point, we can actually distribute those out and provide access to those first responders immediately, through proper security authorization, of course, but immediately get that. And that's all possible with these new networks and providing these tools to actually integrate and distribute those. So we think the market is definitely taking advantage of the advances in technology, and we're happy to really be right at the forefront of delivering those to the public safety community.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. It sounds like, like kind of what you're saying is, I mean, there are some resources already out there with cameras and in different networks. It's a matter of kind of bringing them all together so that the public safety community can really utilize, take advantage of what's out there in a more efficient way. I mean, be able to share all this stuff in real time or near real time, and just kind of bring all what's out there right now and bring it all together under one roof almost.
Exactly. The previous challenge was the previous technology only allowed maybe a handful, 5 folks at a time to be viewing a certain video stream. We've now elevated to the point where we can actually have 1,000 people watching the same stream, and bandwidth is no longer a gating factor. And then by also allowing the sharing of these streams at a central point, you can now take advantage of all the available cameras, let's say within the city. As long as they're all part of the project, we can now take those and stream, so that a first responder can actually get access to any available camera, let's say via a map, and say, I need to see what's going on right here. And they can even auto-rewind these cameras. They were looking for a suspect or some kind of perpetrator.
Yeah, makes sense. Oh, great. Well, thanks, Douglas, so much for the insight there. Also want to bring on this as well as our other panel member, James from Rohde and Schwarz. James, I know you guys kind of have a pretty broad view of the market right now. Can you maybe, I guess, give a little insight on kind of your view of the public safety space when it comes to LTE and kind of how you see Rohde and Schwarz playing in that space right now?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. So I think Gerry and Douglas have certainly mentioned where we see things going. What I was hoping to do was kind of break the market down into chunks. It seems it's much more manageable if you have little certain areas that you can partition off, make sure that works, and tie that into the next step and tie that into the next step. So I kind of broke the market down. This is actually coming from NIST, and the idea was generated by NIST in 2005 that if we break the market down into different area networks, it makes everything much easier to handle. So if we look at all the different PAN, IAN, JAN, if you go to the next slide, we kind of have a breakdown of what those mean. So you've got devices that are wearable or can be handheld, and these devices could be your radio, but you also have sensors on the body, and the sensors on the body would gather physiological information, would also gather environmental information. Like Douglas was talking about, you've got the video coming from a police officer or a first responder, firefighter, the different technologies you use in that personal area network tie into the incident area networks, where now you can move from Bluetooth and LTE or some other technology, and now you're looking at an incident commander that needs to tie everything together. So now we throw up an 802.11 network to support that. You could go from there to jurisdictional area networks and extended area networks, where now you finally tie into the PSTN and whatever big national technology databases we would need to tie into. So
Gotcha.
if we go to the next one.
Yep, sure. Okay.
So if you look at this stuff, you're trying to figure out where is everything going. I've heard about sensors on the body. I've heard about different area networks. Well, where's that tie in? That ties into the next generation call centers. It ties into EMS, ties into law enforcement, because the bottom line is for all of our first responders is they always need to go home at the end of the shift. Mm-hmm. So by being able to supply video, 3D renderings, all this different data, you guarantee that that first responder will go home to his or her family that night. So if I could, I wanted to kind of talk about three scenarios and maybe break it down into where those sensors are and what they're doing on the different first responders' bodies. If you look at the first scenario, you would have a firefighter, and that firefighter is responding to a medical situation, and in that medical situation, that firefighter now is sending information back to dispatch, to wherever hospital the person needs to be taken to. So you've got the ambulance moving, the paramedic team, you track the patient, providing geolocation in real time. All the patient's information and vitals are recorded through wireless monitors and voice recognition systems, sends all the information to everybody concerned. The EMS hospital staff orders are given to the paramedics real time, like Douglas was talking about. You've got monitors on the patient to allow easy patient transport and mobility. Also, the dispatcher is already looking ahead to see where that patient needs to go, because if you have someone that has a heart attack, you would want to get them to a center that could deal with the heart attack versus one where they'd have to be turfed to another facility. So that's the first scenario there. And all this is happening, video, audio, is all happening multi-user and full duplex. A second scenario could be a residential fire, where you've got the fire personnel, EMS, support personnel, and all fire victims are tracked real time, also using geolocation. So that allows the incident commander to have idea of where all his assets are. And part of what that asset information contains is you would have the first engine company responding to a fire, and as that engine company is in transition, you are going and getting information from the GIS, and the GIS goes out and searches building information and plans, knows where the fire hydrants are, also now gives you a 3D rendering of where all your assets are in the house when they get there and you deploy your assets. So you've got emergency situation, you have a fire situation. The third scenario I wanted to talk about was the law enforcement, and this is one that's quite challenging. You've got a police officer pulling up and arresting a suspect. So the police officer is already being tracked. His unit is being tracked via geolocation. Now the police officer goes out and needs to collect data. Any data that the police officer collects is tagged with an RFID device. Also, you're tracking everything audio-wise, so now instead of that, you've got evidence now that's verbal and data that could be tracked. You also have different sensors on your police officer where if that police officer ever removes his gun from the holster or takes the riot gun from the rack. Now all the backup units are immediately told to respond to that situation code 3, sirens going, because they know that that's something dangerous is happening for that officer, and you want to make sure that he or she goes home safely at the end of the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thanks a lot, James, for the insight there. And I did have some of those scenarios on a separate slide, and I forgot to include those, so I apologize for that. But thanks for running through those there. Definitely appreciate it. And it definitely kind of shows, the need for devices and for the equipment that's out there, not just for the networks, to kind of really take advantage of the networks that are out there. So didn't mean to disrupt you there, but I know the slide here I think you wanted to show as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the situations where I am totally behind what's happening with the federal government. I am so impressed with all the people that are trying to herd the cats and get a method to the madness here. I mean, you've got people at PSCR, Cameron, Joel, Emil, Andy, Ken. You've got people at NTIA, Al Vincent, Dr. Rob Stafford, people at NIST, Patrick Gallagher, Leonard Miller, who wrote this first report. I mean, it's just amazing that everything is being pulled together and handled so well via the different federal teams that are there trying to make this work. I think a lot of what's happening here is really good because we seem to be ironing out a number of the LTE issues with the commercial deployments by the big carriers in North America. So I think once we start doing the handoff over to public safety, a lot of those LTE glitches will have already been solved, and it will make things much easier for the public safety, transportation, utilities markets to address the capabilities of LTE.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, great. Thanks, James, again for the information on that. We definitely appreciate it. Now, we have some question and answer here in a little bit. I just want to remind everyone listening in that if you do have any questions for our panel members, to go ahead and use the question function there on the GoToWebinar control panel. You can type those questions in, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can here in a few minutes. But before we get to those, I did want to just, I guess, bring Gerry back in really quick for one more, I guess, kind of wrap up on this. There's been a lot of talk, with Douglas and James about, kind of the personal nature of almost public safety, where the first responders have the devices in their hand, and these devices are built into the cars and the vehicles out there. And you kind of touched a little bit on the fact that the device market does seem to be kind of evolving quite a bit when it comes to smartphones and different technologies there. Gerry, are you seeing a lot of movement in the device space when it comes to support for the public safety sector? When it comes to maybe more ruggedized devices or different or more unique uses of wireless technology?
Good point. I think we talked generally in the past, in my previous comment about the explosion in the number and kinds of devices. But you've got obviously big players like Motorola Solutions, and others that are in the market of ruggedizing and providing opportunities in the field. I think rugged is important, particularly when you have a significant weather outdoor use. So if you're outside and having to interact with an information system, you need it to be more than just carrying a commercial off-the-shelf iPad, which may work fine in a semi-outdoor environment, meaning not inclement weather oriented, but if you're sitting on the side of the road and attending to somebody who needs help, or trying to put out a fire and you've got water running around, you're going to want to have a ruggedization. And I think there's a combination of ruggedization and dedicated software and services that are designed for utilities and public safety. And then there are also appropriate implementations for systems that are operating inside vehicles that are semi-rugged. Panasonic is a well-known supplier of in-vehicle support with the Toughbook, which, and then you have sort of like just the BYOD applied to the field environment for public safety, where you do have some utilization of commercial products that are in the public safety vertical market, but are in fact coming out of the consumer marketplace. If they have an appropriate utilization factor without the weather environment, then they can be very useful, particularly for staff people who aren't recording stuff outdoors. And then you've got the agency and specifications. I think it was great to comment on initiatives are finally happening across the board, city, state, and federal, that we want to be able to make sure that bandwidth is provided, that the devices are working, and we'll have, not drop signal and all of a sudden say, well, just a minute, when I get a signal, I'll send you the EKG. You've got to have a very highly reliable capability out in the field. So I think we're seeing both vertical market and some consumer BYOD things happening, and it's a combination of software services and standards and agency interaction that's making this really exciting market, probably a really big market opportunity because of LTE is finally being the principal enabler that's making this happen.
Gotcha. Well, great. Well, thanks, Gerry, for the insight there. Now, I do want to go to the question and answer section here. I know we've got quite a few questions coming in, and so I guess I want to touch on a few of those here. Maybe we'll start off here. There's a question specifically here for Douglas. It says, are there plans for video optimization for video streaming through the harsh radio environment? I don't know, Douglas, if you have any insight on some of the challenges there with video optimization.
Yeah, I think I don't know specifically regarding the harsh radio environment. I know our efforts have focused mainly on utilizing 3G and then now into LTE and Wi-Fi for video and data transmission. I would suspect one of the limitations for the radio environment would be the devices themselves, because they haven't really been developed to actually display and actually utilize video, which is why we've actually worked mostly with the smartphones and other video-capable devices, which tend to operate more on the Wi-Fi and 3G and LTE networks. But it's something I can look into, and we can follow up afterwards.
Okay, that sounds good. Appreciate it. I do know it looks like we've gotten quite a few questions on the topic of FirstNet, which is just recently named its advisory board. And so, obviously we didn't touch too much on it during this presentation. It's still kind of a new organization coming out to kind of manage this nationwide public safety initiative. I don't know, if you guys had any comments on that. Maybe Gerry, if you had any sort of insight into the FirstNet initiative, or if you've seen anything there that excites you, or any sort of questions of how that might play out.
I would actually like to yield to Smith Micro. I'm
okay.
hogging or Rohde and Schwarz, because I don't want to hog the time here. I'll be the color commentator. So
sure. Well, maybe James, if you want to if you have some insight onto the FirstNet initiative, because again, it does look like there are quite a few questions on that topic. So maybe something at least worth touching on, I guess. Sure.
So I guess I'm kind of looking to a paper that Andy Siebold had talked about, and this situation where the FirstNet's going to be so huge, but yet FirstNet needs to cover areas that have never really been covered commercially before.
Yeah.
But if you look at some of the large utility networks, for example, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, they have a network that extends all the way from Southern California into northern Nevada, goes out to places where only animals live. So I think FirstNet may end up being a marriage of technology with some amazing operator, and tied into hard points that are already out there. And I think it will be a challenge to deploy, but certainly is something that is needed in the future.
Gotcha. And Douglas, I don't know if you had any comments on the FirstNet initiative.
Smith Micro, we're actually involved with NIST and the FirstNet initiative. We're actually part of the project to help define the standards. I mean, Smith Micro's already long been involved with the standards development, such as developing the device communication standards like MBIM, mobile broadband interface model. And through the first step model, I know right now we are really just at the first steps of defining requirements for FirstNet. So from a timeline perspective, I know there's some questions around that. I think it's a little ways off. I mean, we're really just starting to crest, drafting those first requirements and defining what the standards need to be and what you need to be considered in that. So it's really the beginning steps of that.
Gotcha. I know, Gerry, if you had anything you wanted to add as well, or
just to say that this is a good example of this vertical infrastructure happening between standards and support services, where particularly technology enablement is happening at the government level, and two, drives down through state and local, and then also regional as well as dense. I think sometimes we think public safety only is needed in a dense metropolitan area, downtown major top 20 cities or something, and in fact probably there's just as much need for public safety and support on the regional basis as it is locally. So I think that's why this FirstNet initiative is important, but it isn't done yet. It's just now happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is kind of definitely early in the game here, and you guys brought up some good points because I think with the initial D-block auction, the 700 megahertz, there were some coverage concerns there that perhaps scared off some carriers where they had to have coverage in markets or in areas where they didn't traditionally plan to have any coverage. I mean, obviously, out here, out in the West, there's lots of open land that it's hard to generate much revenue from customers out there. So but for public safety, it's obviously important to have with all the wildfires going on in a lot of those areas. So that does seem like one of those issues that FirstNet is going to have to tackle, because that's going to be tricky when it comes to bringing in the commercial carriers on board if they're going to partner on these deployments to get that kind of coverage. So again, like you guys said, it's obviously early in the days on this, and there's a lot to be still ironed out. Some people are kind of asking about, I guess, a general time frame. I mean, that's kind of hard at this point, but obviously the public safety nationwide network has been talked about for a little more than a decade now, and even before then a little bit. But do you guys have any, if you were to break out the crystal ball and predict when this magical nationwide public safety network will be up and running, what kind of time frame are you guys perhaps guessing on that? I mean, obviously it'd be a guess at this point, but what would you guys think would be a legitimate time frame for this to come on board? Maybe Jane, start with you on that one.
This is probably something best discussed over a number of pints of Guinness and a crystal ball. But yeah, I mean, hopefully, if you're listening to the folks at PSCR and NTIA and NIST, I mean, you're looking at some LTE broadband deployments as early as 3 to 5 years. I hope that's when things actually happen, and it'd be very very positive to me to see that happen, but we'll see. Yeah.
I don't know, Douglas, if you have any insight there or guess?
Yeah, I'd say 3 years out is optimistic. If we were to get some trials, most likely in mid to late 2014. But I think 2013 is really going to be about ironing out these requirements and standards, and then finally getting that plan for deployment. So we're at least a good 2 to 3 years out from at least phase 1.
Yeah, gotcha. And Gerry, if you break out the crystal ball, what would your guess be at this point?
Well, it's interesting. These things end up being initiatives for so long, and then they keep coming, like the year of the land, the year of this, that was the year of LTE, and now we're finally seeing it happen. And over the next 12, 15 months, LTE will go from some major cities and some good coverage to multiple operators and nationwide coverage. And so it's going to happen where I think what will in this initiative will gain momentum, and it'll be talked about. There'll be a trial or two, but then when it finally gets implemented, it isn't going to take as long probably to implement it as it did to discuss it and get the standard approved. and it'll actually flip over, it'll reach a tipping point. And I would say that something like that isn't going to happen in 12 months, but it's probably less than 5 years, and the tipping point is probably, like was said, around three years out, and then it'll become quite a, we'll wonder how in the world we got along without it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, I know one of the issues, I guess, when it comes to these networks has been the funding aspect of it. Obviously, Congress earlier this year had kind of set aside, or said at least that they would look at supplying some funds for this. That's always been kind of hanging over this whole issue is who's gonna pay for this network. Is there a business model for the sustainability of a public safety network? I know one of the questions came in kind of asking about that. I mean, do you guys see where, is this one of those things that we just kind of have to look beyond the financial model and just look at the good that this can provide, or what's the importance of having a sustainable financial model for this network? Maybe James, I'll start with you on that one.
Well, I think if you look at the need for deployment of something, I would agree with Gerry and Douglas that this needs to happen sooner rather than later. And I think if I was to, I'd have to bring up the T word and possibly look at some type of tax thing that would happen in the future that would make sure that our first responders are safe. That might be something you see, or you could even see the federal network operator charging states, counties, municipalities for whatever audio, video, data options that they use on the FirstNet network.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I don't know if Douglas, if you got any comment on I guess that financial model of it. Obviously, that's a tricky situation, but maybe your view on how that might play out.
The only other thing I've seen is, post 9/11, I think we're still seeing repercussions of failed communications initiatives, especially at the first responder level. I mean, even, earlier this year, there were still instances of communication breakdown. So I think, these tend to be catalysts sometimes to help spur funding or, acceleration of these types of projects. So, I continue to see pressure there. And, again, looking at the crystal ball, I think that and the convergence of as technology really helps make this, a little bit more affordable and easier to digest. I think, hopefully it'll all come together and we'll see it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gerry, I don't know if you have any comment there also on kind of the financial aspect of this network. I mean, it's difficult to kind of bring up the financial part of it when it comes to what we're talking about, but obviously that's been a big concern for this. I don't know if you had any insight as well or any comments on that aspect of it. Gerry, did we lose Gerry?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Talking away on mute. That try to be quiet. I think in final wrap-up comment, which is important, I think, for the people to have a takeaway here is that we've all felt that public safety has been an important area in which to try to provide great service offerings. But it's really now that we've had the advancement in technology to build the devices that are lightweight but yet powerful, and we have networks that make the communication possible. And I think it's a renaissance time that is going to be producing not only a large market, but actually a service set offering that is just fundamentally different than what we've been able to provide in the past. So we're in a real inflection point, going from trying to get a little better and dealing with limitations to all of a sudden being able to do some very exciting things. And so this is a very good time to be in the sector. So I'll let others maybe wrap up comments as well. But I think this is not a linear going forward. This is over the next few years. There's going to be some real major changes going on in this sector. But they're, by and large, and not all frustrating, but positive.
Well, hopefully we appreciate that, Gerry. Thanks so much. And yeah, as we get kind of the end here, I don't know, Douglas, do you have any closing comments you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think certainly as we progress towards and see LTE, the light at the end of the tunnel, from our side, we're certainly seeing adoption the currently available connection technologies today, allowing many of these jurisdictions and agencies to utilize greater connectivity and also, advanced features like video deployment and access today to our solutions. So we think, the market's ready and understanding of what's coming, and be fully primed when LTE hits.
Gotcha. And James, I don't know if you have any final comments as well.
I did. I think one of the things about LTE, and I thank the network operators for this, is so many of the bugs are being hammered out commercially now with us as the test dummies. So when we finally get LTE up and running commercially, the handoff for LTE to public safety should be much easier than it would be had FirstNet gone up first versus commercial deployments. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, great. Well, again, everyone, thanks so much for the answering the questions. I definitely appreciate that. And thanks again to all the listeners for the questions, and sorry for those that we did not get to. We will be sharing a list of questions, unanswered questions, with our panel members, and so if time allows, they can follow up individually on those questions. So we definitely thank you for all those questions, and obviously we didn't get to all those, but also want to let everyone know that this webinar will be archived on the rcrwireless.com site in a few days if you want to relive it for any reason. And you can also look this week. We should have a feature report on this topic on our site. Should be there by Friday at the latest is the plan. So please feel free to check back on the rcrwireless.com site for that report as well on this topic, which is a very important topic right now for the industry. So before we sign off here, I also want to thank our sponsors for this webinar, Rohde and Schwarz. Thanks so much for helping us out here, and also to Smith Micro for providing some insight and support for our webinar. Definitely appreciate that. And thanks again to everyone for participating today, and special thanks to Gerry, Douglas, and James for providing the insight. And thanks a lot, everyone, for listening in, and have a good afternoon. Thanks.